Hello and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. With me, Anna Kalczyńska. Good evening. Russia hits the energy infrastructure in Ukraine again. Volodymyr Zelensky called it one of the largest strikes on his country's power facilities. Meanwhile, the Russian army is seizing ground in the eastern Ukraine. Both Ukraine and Russia are running off the troops, and according to many experts, 2025 would be the year of the negotiations. To discuss the latest development in Ukraine and Donald Trump's view on the negotiations, I'm joined by Benjamin L. Schmitt, Senior Fellow, University of Pennsylvania. Good evening, sir.
Great to be here. Thank you.
All right, so as winter approaches, Ukraine is in a critical condition, and that's a fact. With a devastated economy and with Russian forces advancing in the east, Ukrainian troops are spread thin. The fundamental question remains, can Ukraine go on fighting?
Well, Ukraine can go on fighting. I think they need to probably increase the recruitment levels to some extent. But, it's going to come down much more to what we as the West do to support Ukraine going forward. And that's going to certainly include decisions that incoming President Donald Trump and his administration will make. I will say that what we're seeing again this week, which is widespread kinetic strikes by the Russian military against Ukrainian energy infrastructure, this is the apex of what we've been worried about for the better part of 2 decades, which is Russian energy weaponization, which began by building monopolistic practices across the European continent and threatening and having gas cut off for natural gas supplies, including through Ukraine. In the past, they have basically escalated to large-scale kinetic warfare against energy infrastructure in Ukraine, and also sabotage attacks and what you'd call hybrid threats and attacks against energy and critical infrastructure across the European continent. So this is nothing new. It's just the scale is what we've predicted, and it's something that we really need to push back on, because to rebuild all of the energy infrastructure across the country of the size of Ukraine is going to cost a lot more than protecting it now.
All right. Regarding any peace deal, Ukraine is very clear. There can be no peace talks and there can be no peace deal without security guarantees. Now, we're talking here, I'm talking to you in Warsaw, Poland, where I'm basically placed 200 kilometers from Tyr, where Russians are bombing Ukrainian towns and cities. Only today, 94 ballistic missiles fell on Ukraine. So do you think Ukraine can get the security guarantees they need and want? And what can they be?
I think that there's no choice. We have to make sure that there are security guarantees. Ultimately, Ukraine should be part of the NATO alliance and have Article 5 protections. But in the shorter term, there's absolutely security guarantees that have to be in place before you could ever think of having a ceasefire, simply because the Russian Federation will use any time that is taken with any sort of ceasefire to rearm and re-enlist, et cetera, and build up its forces to take another run at Ukraine. Its goal was not to take a section of eastern Ukraine, but the entire country, because what threatens Russia and Russia's dictatorial leader, Vladimir Putin, the most is a successful, economically vibrant and democratic Ukraine. And that will happen unless Russia basically tries to squash the democratic vibrancy of Ukraine, across the entire country. So yes, there has to be security guarantees, and I suspect that that's going to be one of the big questions that European leaders are going to be talking about with incoming President Donald Trump in just a few weeks' time.
Exactly. As you rightly pointed out, it's not a war about a parcel of terrain. It's a war on domination, basically. But the ironclad security guarantee that would be the NATO membership for Ukraine now seems to be ruled out. It's out of the table. So what other form can it take? We're hearing about those security guarantees since at least 6 months.
Yeah, so the notion that NATO membership is fully ruled out is not really something that we can say yet. There's certainly been a lot of reporting that Donald Trump isn't in favor of it, and other members of the alliance have been pushing back.
Well, yes, I mean, J.D. Vance said that he rather proposes Ukraine neutrality. So we haven't still heard from Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. I mean, frankly, it's going to be in the moment what we're going to see from Donald Trump on this. But I think it's inherent on all of us to try to speak out publicly and illustrate why what Vice President-elect J.D. Vance is saying is so dangerous. A neutral, forced neutrality Ukraine is not something that's going to help in any way support European security, Ukrainian security, or security across the transatlantic community. And so, this notion that neutrality is going to solve this war, this crisis, is absurd, because we've absolutely seen the fact that in 2014 Ukraine was neutral. It wasn't moving towards NATO membership, and Russia invaded then and has continued to invade ever since. And so these are the sort of things that we need to remind incoming policymakers that's just a very, very dangerous play to try to force neutrality on Ukraine.
As we are watching pictures from Paris, Donald Trump talking to Volodymyr Zelensky, to Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders, we wonder, is it really possible that Donald Trump stop funding Ukraine altogether?
I mean, I think anything is possible with President Trump. That is certainly something we saw in the first administration. But you have to remember, policy is people as well, and it really depends on what his senior leadership team is telling him and what they are advising to do. And I thus far really hope that incoming Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and General Keith Kellogg, who will be the special envoy for Ukraine, really basically indicate and make sure that the only way to have Ukraine have a just peace is to be in the strongest possible position with a Russia that is losing this war. And that means that we need to increase sanctions and military support for Ukraine now in order to get them into that position to have a negotiation with Vladimir Putin.
I would say that the position of the new administration is still a mystery to many, with signals coming to from the special envoy to Ukraine, as you rightly mentioned, but also other experts claiming, like New York Times today, that Donald Trump is unlikely he would back Ukraine militarily. So we guess we still have to wait and see what happens. But what do you see the future for Ukraine in the coming months? Do you really expect the talks happening? As Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, said that they're likely to begin to start this winter.
I think it's possible that talks could start this winter, but I don't see the war ending anytime soon. And part of the reason, again, is that what's being described, either having a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, having Ukraine in some way partitioned, but without security guarantees, or with security guarantees, all of these things are really complex. And again, none of them basically answer what Vladimir Putin has set out to do, which is to destroy Ukrainian democracy. These would, although having basically unacceptable territorial concessions for the Ukrainian people right now, they would preserve Ukrainian democracy, and that would be a loss for Vladimir Putin. And so I just don't see that will bring a lasting peace in any case. And so that's really why we should be, instead of focusing on this, arming Ukraine to the greatest extent possible and enforcing sanctions on the Russian Federation to the greatest extent possible to actually push for Ukrainian victory, because that's really what's going to allow for a sustained peace and allow for a direct pathway for Ukraine to have broad support for NATO membership in the future.
Of course, many other questions remains to be answered, like this one about the European engagement. Is Europe ready, and does it have the political will and industrial capacities also to replace the US aid for Ukraine? But that will have to wait for another conversation and another World Talk. Thank you very much, Benjamin L. Schmitt, for taking your time tonight, for being with us.
Thank you.
That concludes this edition of World Talks. Thank you for watching, but please make sure to get the latest updates here on TVP World. Thank you very much.